Welcome back to part two or the afternoon part of today's annual conference by Rice Travel Institute. I know a few of us are just trickling in. We are ready for the next few presenters to present their capstone projects, their research, their discoveries, and so forth. Okay, so I guess we can go ahead and start. So the next presenter that I will be introducing is Bernarda Bustillos. Bernarda Bustillos is a tourism and sales professional with over 13 years of experience designing transformative travel experiences rooted in sustainability, cultural authenticity, and community engagement. Her work focuses on creating meaningful itineraries across South America that connect travelers with local people, places, and stories. And as the founder of Travelry, she combines her passion for travel and education to lead immersive educational journeys that promotes responsible tourism and empower local communities. Curious, adaptable, and purpose-driven, Bernarda brings creativity and impact to every project that she leads. And today's capstone project by Bernarda will be titled Travelry. And Bernarda, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screens.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, if you don't mind
Okay.
putting it full screen, if you can.
Yeah. Yes, of course. So, good afternoon with everyone. I would like to give a special thanks to Rice Travel Institute and Vinci to invite me to share my project today in this important event. I hope you had enjoyed your lunch. As we said in Ecuador, barriga llena, corazón contento. This means in English, full belly, happy heart. So let's start. So I'm pretty sure you are thinking about what does travelary means. Maybe it's the mix of two words. What is it? So Travelary, it's a project that I created after many years working in tourism industry in Ecuador and after joining the flagship program at Rice Travel Institute, which really changed the way I think about travel. The name of Travelary comes from three words actually: travel, library, and discover. And it means that every journey is a space for learning. It's not just about visiting places. It's about listening, connecting, and growing with the people and communities we meet. So I decided to create something different: educational journeys in Ecuador and South America that are respectful, meaningful, and rooted in care. Travelary offers experiences that invite us to reflect, to understand, and to make a positive impact. But why? I had this idea? Um, Actually, after working 12 years with the major tour operators in Ecuador, I came to face a reality that I could no longer ignore. Even though many companies talk about sustainable travel, in reality, most of their actions were just for marketing, and they weren't truly thinking about the damage that mass tourism was causing and is causing to the environment, the wildlife, and local communities. And there was two important experiences that I had in my life, and was when I was in one of my trips to the Galapagos Islands. I was talking with a local guide, and he told me an scary story. There was a male sea lion in one of the islands, and this sea lion was a little aggressive, and most of the tour operators in the Galapagos were worried about this sea lion. So they decided to took the easy solution, and they illegally killed this animal. And the other experience that I had is when a tourist tried to take illegally 4 iguanas from the Galapagos Island to sell as an exotic animal. So that is when I realized that the problem it's not only with the companies, but also with the travelers. And I ask myself, what can I do to stop these harmful practices? How can I use my experience to help transform how we travel and change this reality? And that's how Travelary was born. At that moment, I had the idea of create a tour operator, but I realized I didn't have the tools or the correct tools to create the tour operator. So that's when RISE and its flagship program appeared. Honestly, it felt like one of those movie moments when angels arrive with a choir in the background to save me. And that is why here is a photo of myself giving a hug to Rice. Because all the information that I get from this program helped me to develop educational itineraries. For example, I learned that sustainability not only includes nature, it only includes people and culture and traditions. For that reason, in my itineraries, I try to mix the visit to natural reserves and to local communities, indigenous communities. I also understand my role as a traveler and as a tour operator. I reflect on my own identity and privilege, and I design trips that are respectful, and I learn to listen to the communities. And when you are respectful and you know how to listen, you could create honest connections. I also learn how to um, design experiences that center the indigenous voices and knowledge. That, for example, in my country, most of the tour operators just add a visit to an indigenous community as an attraction, but they are not the leaders. So in my itineraries, we try to add visit to the local communities, but they are the leaders. They guide the experience, for example, like ancestral ceremony. We have the midwives, we have some cooking classes, and all these experiences are led by women. I also learned about caring for animals in tourism. I learned how tourism can hurt animals without us knowing. That is why we are including wildlife activities that respect animal freedom. For example, we have the Andean Condor Conservation Project, or you also could do a respectful snorkeling in Kicker Rock, which is located in the Galapagos Islands. No cages, no shows. We also learned about accessibility and inclusion. I learned how it is to make travel more inclusive for people of all the identities and abilities. This inspired me to include experiences like sensory dinners and forest walks led by blind facilitators. This help us to this help travelers to connect with the world and in a new powerful way. And finally, connecting travel with big global issues. I understand how travel is related with global issues like the climate change. And for that reason, we include experiences like visit some ecosystems that now are in danger. For example, El Páramo ecosystem, which is an really important ecosystem in Ecuador because thanks to the Páramo, the main cities of the highlands of Ecuador have water. And also I learned how to choose my partners. During all this time, I have been working with Quinti Travel. This is a tour operator located in Ecuador, and they are experts in slow tourism. And this is the first company in Ecuador that offers sensory tours guided by blind facilitators. So a big thanks to Quinti Travel and Liz Ramirez. She is the founder. So now that we have the experience, we have the knowledge, we have partners. So now, why Ecuador? Why create these itineraries in Ecuador? It's not because it's my country, no. It's because it's one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. Ecuador has 91 different ecosystems. It has 4 regions: the Amazon rainforest, the Andes mountain, the Pacific coast, and the Galapagos Islands. We also have a rich cultural heritage with 14 recognized indigenous nationalities, and we won different awards, like in 2024 by Lonely Planet, we were named the best sustainable tourism destination. Ecuador is a place where indigenous knowledge, nature, and culture come together. The Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos, I'm pretty sure you have heard about the Galapagos. This is a really unique place in the world. Over the 20% of the species are found nowhere else on Earth. All of them are endemic. Also, these islands inspired Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. That is why Galapagos is well known like the living classroom, where travelers can learn about nature, science, and conservation. And also the islands won some awards, like the UNESCO World Heritage Site that described as a living museum. We have the Wanderlust Travel Awards in 2024, like the world's most desirable region, and much more. So now I would like to share with you just some days of an itinerary, and you will be able to see that we are applying all the things that we learn in the flagship program. So for example, in day 1, you will have a welcome Andean ceremony. This will help you to connect directly with the Mother Earth and say thanks. On second day, you will be visiting the Afro-Ecuadorian community in Ecuador. And this is one of my favorites actually, because Afro-Ecuadorians are really happy and they have a delicious gastronomy. So you will have the chance to participate in dancing, because they are going to play the marimba next to the river. You are going to learn about music, cuisine, and much more. In day 3 and 4, you will be visiting the cloud forest. This is a special day to connect with nature and to explore the biodiversity, and through the bird watching, forest hikes, and visit local farms. In the local farms, you will be able to taste exotic fruits. So we have a lot of different exotic fruits, and we have a tasting here. And also you will try the misque. Misque is an ancestral Andean drink, and it's based on the agave. Next day will be in Quito Historic Center. Quito was declared the first World Cultural Heritage Site. So it has a lot of culture, history, and you will visit the main attractions there. And also it's pretty funny, because there we have the herbalist. The herbalists are women that with herbs clean your energies. So it's a really good practice to clean our energies. And also we'll have the visit to the last artisan, and you will have a team workshop. And we close this day with a sensory dinner. As I mentioned before, these sensory experiences will be guided by blind facilitators. Next day, Papallacta and Oyacachi. These two cities are located in between the highlands and the Amazon region. And here is the perfect time to visit this ecosystem, Paramo. And we will learn about the conservation of this ecosystem and also about a very important project that we have here that is to take care of the Andean condor. The Andean condor is really important in the Andes, not only in Ecuador, in all South America. So day 7, you will have the opportunity to visit an indigenous market. This is one of the biggest indigenous market in Latin America. And you will also have an overnight with an indigenous community in an indigenous home. So there you are going to try the pachamanca. Pachamanca is a meal that indigenous people prepare under the ground. So they dig a hole in the ground and they prepare everything there. So it's really interesting and it's delicious also. Next day, we are going to the Amazon region, is at Chidona. And here you are going to visit the Amazonian midwives and learn about the ancestral practices of care and healing. And also we include a Guayusa ceremony at the end of the day. So the next day you will have an immersive sensory experience in the forest. The same way, guided by sensory facilitator. And what is the positive impact that we have with all these itinerary and trips? Especially in this itinerary, we have a positive impact to 8 local communities included the Afro-Ecuadorian community, Quechua and Amazonian groups. More than 60 people, including artisans, guides, farmers, cooks, musicians, and cultural leaders. 3 conservation projects, the spectacle bear preservation at Maquipucuna, the Andean condor protection in Papallacta, and the marine and land species conservation in the Galapagos Islands. And part of the money that we get from the trips, we are going to give to the Oyacachi community to help them with some education programs for their children. And a final reflection, travelers start with a simple question: how can we travel in a better way? I learned it's all about connection with people, places, and purpose. We are not just making trips, but a new way to travel with care and respect. Let's keep working. Let's keep imagining this together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bernarda. That was amazing. I love your final reflections. It's all about connection. It's all about connecting with the people, with the places, and giving travel a purpose, which is everything that RISE supports. And like Mincy mentioned in the chat box, this itinerary is a RISE endorsed itinerary. So definitely get in contact with Bernarda if you want to learn more and you want to go on one of these trips as well. So Bernarda, please look at the chat. There are some amazing positive comments coming in. If you have any questions for Bernarda, please feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat box. And then again, if you want to get connected with Bernarda, please feel free to connect with her. Bernarda, if you want to share your
Yes,
email
yes.
in the chat box, just so people can copy that, or your website? Or
Yes,
anything like that?
we are still working in the website, but for sure to my email, you can contact me.
Awesome.
And that's
Alright.
a question. That's a
Oh.
question from Casey in
Oh,
the
I'm
chat.
sorry. I
Yep.
missed that one. Are you working, so Casey mentioned, are you working with travelers directly or also working with tour operators?
I am working with travelers and tour operators, actually. Yes. That is why we are working with Kinti Travel, because they are specialized in the sensorial experiences. Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit more about the process of working with these operators? Is there any pushback? Is it usually received with open arms? Are there any
Well,
obstacles there?
actually, we always try to work with tour operators that have the same values and the same purpose. We try to keep this of the ethical travel and try to develop educational itineraries. We are open to everything, but yep, we could check anything that
Yeah, I
anyone that
think
wants to work with us.
yeah, I think that's a to clarify, the question was actually about whether your clients are tour operators or or tour businesses or travelers. So are you a B2B or a
Okay.
B2C? Yeah.
Okay. No, I am a tour operator, so I work with the clients, but we also could work with travel agencies. That's the benefit to be a tour operator. You could work directly with clients, or you could work with travel agencies, for example. So you could be a B2B or a B2C at the same time.
Yeah, some businesses do both. Awesome. Any other questions or thoughts for Bernarda? Okay, we're going to go ahead and go to our next speaker. So we have, oh, my apologies. Okay, we have Hyungjun Jin. So Hyungjun Jin is an educator and curriculum developer. You all can see my screen, right? Is that okay? Okay, yes. Curriculum developer whose work centers on justice, sustainability, and compassionate global citizenship. They support homeschool students through Global Village School, helping young people explore progressive education grounded in peace, equity, and ecological awareness. As part of the Institute for Humane Education, Hyungjun is developing a course that brings the solutionary framework into practice, empowering both formal and informal educators to address systemic issues through critical thinking and action. Deeply committed to reimagining education and wellness, they are also creating an off-grid retreat and learning center in Guatemala that challenges the exploitative practices of the mainstream fitness and wellness industry. With a passion for ethical travel and a belief in its power to expand worldviews, Hyungjun draws from their own international experience to inspire thoughtful, responsible engagement with the world. Their work invites learners to become agents of meaningful change, both locally and globally. And their capstone project title is From Gentrification to Land Back, Decolonizing Wellness Tourism at Lake Atitlan. Welcome, Hyun.
Thank you, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Give me one sec. Let me. It's really great to see some members of the cohort and some new faces and familiar faces today. Really amazing presentations throughout the day. So I will be presenting on the issues of the wellness tourism industry at Lake Atitlan. Lake Atitlan and the surrounding areas are the ancestral and current lands and territories of Maya Sutu Hill and Cachiquel peoples. It was formed in a massive volcanic crater 84,000 years ago and is surrounded by lush mountains and volcanoes. And it has a reputation of being a spiritual and holistic hub. Some people sometimes refer it to as the Bali of the Americas. I came to live in the Lake Atitlan region in 2018 after having lived in Guatemala City since 2013. I was a biology teacher and environmental science teacher at an international school. And during that time, we were discussing a lot about personal choices and lifestyle choices in sustainability. And a lot of the questions that came up for the students were that, how can we overcome these systems? How can we make personal choices when we aren't given the options to make better choices? And so the reason I started the current project was to see how I could personally lower my carbon footprint by going off grid and living in a different way than when I was really plugged into like city living and society. So my initial intention was to create an intentional community here. And over the years, during my time spent here, the project has evolved towards more anti-oppression, decolonization, and collective liberation. And also during my time here, I had an opportunity to work at Colegio Impacto Maya, which is a school for Cachiquel girls and young women. And I got to really see the impacts of patriarchy and colonization and racism. And I also had an opportunity to teach yoga there for a short period of time, and saw that there was a lot of interest, but not access for a lot of the folks in the school. And in these years too, I was working part-time for a yoga retreat center, and could see firsthand a lot of the unsustainable practices that they had in these businesses. So some of the key issues to discuss when we're looking at the yoga and wellness retreat industry in this region is the gentrification and displacement in the Lake Atitlan region. So a lot of foreigners coming in and seeing the possibility to make money, buy up a lot of land and create these retreat centers. And they do this through a lot of exploitative labor practices and low wages. There's also a lot of environmental degradation that happen as a result of poorly managed retreat centers. And there's also issues of cultural appropriation of yoga and indigenous traditions. My observations have been that there's a lot of North Americans or Europeans who are holding like Chichimeca sweat lodge ceremonies, as well as Mayan ceremonies and Maya ceremonies, excuse me. And that a lot of these places also have exclusive practices where a lot of marginalized and minoritized groups are not really welcome or don't have access to that space. This is one of the photos from San Marcos, which is a region, a town here along the lake that is known for kind of it being a spiritual hub. And you can see clearly in these photos, like who is not present, who's being excluded. And you can actually see like the only brown person in this is probably this person in the background that is likely working there and not having access to the practice or the community that they're creating. Some of the root causes here are the colonial legacies. So capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. And these exploitative systems often commodify cultures, people, and land. And this is worsened by the profit-driven models that prioritize tourists and center tourists over local communities. A different approach I would like to take is to create a space that really centers community collaboration and co-designing with local leaders. I think that the physical space can be used for a lot more than retreats, in that it can be a community space that can be shared and utilized by the local community to create community for themselves. In all the planning and programming, always keeping in mind to center marginalized voices in that wellness space. And also thinking about like, outside the context of this locality, like who is being marginalized and excluded in wellness spaces in general. Having a sustainable and inclusive economic opportunities for local residents, ensuring that their work experiences and compensation for their labor is equitable and fair, and that the practices take into consideration the environmental impact and the protection of wildlife, as well as having a plant-based kitchen that acknowledges the amazing presentation that Natalie gave, that all of these issues are connected, and that addressing using non-human or other animals as food sources is connected to sustainability and addressing issues around justice. I also believe that it's really important to honor yoga's philosophical roots. Yoga is not necessarily about fitness, like it's an 8-limbed practice, and asana, or the physical practice of yoga, is just one limb. So really acknowledging that this is a spiritual practice, a philosophy, and a lifestyle, and that should be included in the teachings and the learnings around the practice of yoga. As well as addressing the cultural appropriation of indigenous traditions and practices that are occurring in the spiritual practices that exist around this lake. And the integration of social justice and decolonization practices. So really having that anti-oppression, decolonization at the center of all the decision-making and programming that happens here. And moving away from the profit-first models to prioritize the collective well-being and the liberation of all beings. Some of the key elements that I would like to focus on is a community-centered space. So definitely thinking about, well, what does fair wages look like in this context, and what is the equitable economic opportunities for folks who are seeking employment in these establishments. And to include values-driven initiatives, such as opportunities for indigenous local community to be able to have access to these practices and to have space for these practices as well. Having cultural integrity, so education programs on yoga's roots, as well as the local practices and traditions, and addressing and preventing cultural appropriation of these practices. Sustainable practices in terms of the operations of the retreat center, creating ecocentric initiatives and conservation efforts, and exploring possible land back models. So I will say that I think it's really also important to acknowledge that I'm not from here, although I have lived here longer than I've lived in Korea and almost as long as I've lived in the United States. And so I feel a deep connection to this place. Also at the time, as a foreigner, when I came to this place and purchased this land, I had not had the understanding or the knowledge around what it means to be a landowner where on stolen land, essentially, right? So I have been thinking about what are the possibilities in the long term for land back models. And so some of the possible ways are land transfer, so transfer of land titles directly back to indigenous communities, land buyback programs where land purchase from willing sellers are followed by transfer of land titles back to indigenous communities. There's also a community land trust where we can establish community land trusts that are owned and managed under the stewardship of indigenous communities. And cultural and environmental conservation initiatives, so linking land back initiatives with cultural and environmental conservation efforts for broader support. Creating economic development opportunities, so tying back land initiatives to economic development for indigenous communities, such as through sustainable tourism, agriculture, or renewable energy projects. And importantly, I believe that as the community of foreigners who own property here, own businesses here, I'm part of that community, and so trying to create educational awareness campaigns to raise awareness about the history and the importance of land to indigenous cultures, as well as benefits of land back initiatives to society as a whole. So the space I'm currently creating, these are some of the practice spaces that have, this is actually, we're just kind of at the end of finishing with the construction. So these are some of the spaces that are being developed. Here's a couple examples of the lodging that we are creating. And this is actually, as you can see, we use bamboo and plaster as much as we can. We try to use sustainable building materials to also address the environmental cost of using too much concrete or blocks to build, which is what are commonly used for construction here. These are some of the gardens and the views from the property. And yeah, as you can see, we run completely on solar. We actually have our own well on site, and all of our wastewater management systems are on site as well. Part of our big effort is to create habitat for wildlife. We've only developed about 1/3 of the property, and the other 2/3 is being thoughtfully developed to create more wildlife habitat for wildlife. So vision for impact. To empower marginalized communities with tools for self-determination, to promote healing and equity and resilience through inclusive practices, and to establish sustainable and culturally rich wellness models that uplift everyone. Some of the next steps for myself that I'm currently working on, I'm thinking a lot about how I can build and develop a social entrepreneurship model for a retreat center. I would also like to establish a 501c3 nonprofit wing with a board of directors to be able to do some more community work as well. And one of the goals is to build out an easy to follow model for other businesses in the area, so that they can also see that this is a sustainable way to exist as a business model. That does not exploit low wages and labor and have detrimental impacts on the local environment and the people and the wildlife. I'm actually currently building out our website. Suzanne, who is on our RISE team, introduced me to her sister, and she's working on that with me right now. Also really working on, I'm not a big social media person, but I'm trying to learn so that I can use that as a marketing tool. Really looking into building partnership with existing organizations with similar values and like-mindedness, and to build a network of yoga teachers and other practitioners also with shared values. And then also to create regenerative food production here, so that we can lessen our dependence on systems outside of what we can do here that are also not as sustainable in its practice. So to acknowledge a lot of the learnings around yoga and its philosophical roots are from the Ignite Institute. Maya is that a nonprofit that I had mentioned earlier about the School for Kachikel Girls. Urban Sanctuary is a Black women-owned yoga studio and nonprofit in Denver that I've been partnering with, and they will actually be hosting a yoga teacher training session here in January, and will be my first large group that I'll be accepting here. And then obviously RISE Travel Institute and the Institute for Humane Education, that informs a lot of my understanding around these issues. Here are the citations of where I got a lot of the resources. And I really appreciate your time, and thank you for allowing me to share about this project.
Thank you so much, Hyung. You can look at the chat. There's so much celebration and appreciation for your work. I'm going to actually call in Casey if you can unmute yourself and share your question. That way we can hear your voice.
Hi. Hi, Young. It's so beautiful. I hadn't seen it. What a great space. I'm wondering, you had mentioned that you're working with local communities to be involved in the space. So what are some of the ways that they would like to use the space? And will it be for mostly nurturing community, or will there be economic opportunities for them as well?
So one of the specific ways I'm trying to partner with is Maya, Colegio Impacto. So this school for Kachikel girls, there's a lot of interest in yoga, and they see that it's a profitable business here at the lake, that there's a lot of money coming into this industry, and they would like to find a pathway to be a part of that. And yoga practice as it is currently in the fitness and wellness industry, there's a lot of barriers. It's not cheap to get yoga teacher training, and so some of the ways that I'm thinking about is to be able to provide scholarships for that type of opportunities, for local communities to be able to participate and create both capacity and competency in that, to be able to be leaders in this industry. I would also like to utilize the space for community connection. I often see that some of the barriers that the local community experiences is that there's not space for them to be able to actualize some of their community building. So my hope is that this space, the physical space, can be utilized for that. Yeah, and to be able to really not be the one determining that, right? Because I shouldn't be the one to determine that. So to identify the local leaders, to say how would you like to use this space, and how would you what would you like to do here? And so that is something that I'm still working on, developing these relationships. But yeah, that's at the center of the community building here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hyung. And I know, Vinci, you asked a similar question. Did you want to expand on your question, or did Hyung answer?
I want to give the opportunity to other people to ask questions, because I get to connect with Hyung, on a daily basis. And Hyung, just wanted to congratulate you. I have had the privilege to see the evolution of your project from a few years ago to what it is now, and I just really wanted to applaud and congratulate you on building such a beautiful project, and that's super meaningful, and it's truly like a true example of what decolonized approach to travel means. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Vinci. I really appreciate those words.
Thank you. Yeah, some really great stuff. Suzanne asked, how can we help promote your retreat space? I know the website isn't done yet, but is there any other ways? Maybe we can wait till the website's done. Is there anything we can do in the meantime to help promote your retreat?
Yeah, if you know people in the fitness and wellness industry, or in yoga spaces, to maybe just in casual conversation mention it. You can share my email address with them. There is an Instagram page that there's not much on there, but I'm still working on. And so I will drop some of those things in the chat. And it would just be really great if, as I'm really getting started, to, if you have suggestions on building partnerships, relationships with yoga teachers, or practitioners that are aligned in values, it would be really great to be able to share those contacts with me as well. So I really appreciate that. I'll drop my email address and Instagram here in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hyung. And before we move on to the next presenter, I did want to share or direct you, Hyung, to John Sutherland's chat to apply for the Meaningful Travel app if you think it's a good fit. That's a resource you can also utilize to help promote your work and then bring in more traffic. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, we're going to move on to our next presenter, who is Julia Mesaros. Dr. Julia Mesaros is an associate professor of sociology at East Texas A&M University. Sorry, just one second. Okay. Her passions are teaching and conducting research, and she loves being able to share her research on global issues with her students at ETAMU. Dr. Mesaros is currently working on a book about the mail order bride industry, which she calls the international dating industry. Her book examines the development of this industry on a global scale from Ukraine to Colombia to the Philippines and how it markets itself to Western men. She has interviewed numerous people in the industry as well as the men and women who participate to create a unique snapshot of the industry that challenges perceptions that it is a form of human trafficking. In her free time, she enjoys pickleball, yoga, and cats. And Julia's capstone capstone project is titled Romance Retirement.
Thank you for the introduction and for having me today. I really appreciate all the presentations so far that I got to witness, and it's going to be hard to follow up after that presentation because I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to go on a yoga retreat because I love yoga too. So I'm like, so exciting. So mine is a little bit more academic. So my capstone project is a smaller piece of that larger book project and more kind of a side piece that I didn't touch in the book. So this is about romance retirement and men's aging mobilities from the global north to the global south. So as Natalie mentioned, I studied romance tours in Colombia, Ukraine, and the Philippines. And while I was in all three countries, I ran into quote unquote expat communities of Americans and Europeans, so Westerners, that also, a lot of the times the men who participated in romance tours also were interested in potentially retiring in these countries. And a lot of them would also participate in sex tourism. So there was a lot of intertwining between what are looked at as three differentiated populations of men. And so a lot of men are actually thinking about migrating with their wives as they retire. And some of them actually move to places in the global south, particularly looking for love as single older men. And a author, Candace Kelly, calls these women hospice wives, right? So while I was in Colombia, my first night in Colombia ever in the field, I was eating at a Mexican restaurant, and these three gentlemen, one was a Polish American, one Indian American, and one older Canadian guy, and they were hanging out and they started talking to me like, what are you doing here? Why are you by yourself, etc. And they all told me they moved down to Colombia in order to find younger women. They thought there was going to be a larger, younger dating pool available to them, and that the women in Colombia tended to be more feminine. And he says, women in America are trash now. These women are fat and want men with, sorry, I can't see. It's all in my... There we go. With money and big, you know what? Most of them want Black men. I had to get out of there. So there's some like racism in there as well. Then I started, as I was going through each location in my research, that I started noticing there were a lot of guys who were doing this in the Philippines and Ukraine as well. And so I started thinking about men's north to south flow. So in general, right, people who move from north to south tend to be understudied. We mostly focus in migration stuff on south to north flows. And so a lot of the north to south mobilities, as I said, have been studied as separate populations, whereas I found them to be quite intermingled and overlapping. And what I really find underneath this all is that women's reproductive labor is essential to men's performances and understandings of their masculinity, particularly as they age. So I'm looking at what I would call men's intimate migrations, which is based on intimate migrations concept from Pereñas and Wong. And also thinking, as I mentioned, about how romance retirement ties into romance tourism and how all of these things also tie into sex tourism and overlap. So in terms of sex tourism, all 3 countries I visited, I would consider to be sexscapes, which Denise Brennan kind of identified as geographic spaces that have been pushed towards economic development through tourism and sex tourism in particular. And this idea of the girlfriend experience being very popular in these countries, and how men often, when they are engaged in sex and romance tourism in these spaces, that they're looking for women's labor beyond just sex. And they think that Western women, particularly Western sex workers and things of that nature, will not provide that kind of intimate labor for them. So romance tourism, or the male, quote unquote, mail order bride industry, is based around email correspondence and tours. Most of the men actually in the industry, 90%, the industry will tell you, actually stay online. They call them keyboard Romeos. And a lot of the guys are actually quite happy with the fantasy of a relationship. And I think that is only increasing as they have chat bots and different things to immediately respond to people on these websites now. We saw high rates of marriage in the Philippines. So in the Philippines, I saw the most marriages and successful couples. However, most men wanted to retire in Colombia. And prior to the war going on in Ukraine, Ukraine was the most popular tour location in general. The Philippines was the most popular place in Asia, Colombia, and Latin America. That's why I chose all 3 countries. Previous scholarship by different scholars has looked at retirees in both China and Thailand. So James Farr found that 90% of international marriages in Shanghai are actually between local Chinese women with foreign men, which challenges this narrative that all of these couples want to leave and move to the global north. Thailand actually has 100,000 northern migrants, and Howard took a sample of 1,000 of them and found that 96% of these men are migrants. Oh, excuse me. The median age was 60 years old. They typically had limited financial resources and were most often visa insecure. In Malaysia and the Philippines, Green found that retirees in Malaysia live on limited resources as well, and are also visa insecure, having to conduct visa runs to different countries to continually renew their visas. Retirees in the Philippines, American retirees in particular, have more access to longer term visas. And if they are former members of the US military branches, they get access to veterans admin benefits and hospitals over there. In the Philippines, there are numerous communities that are still outside of former military bases in Angeles City and Subic Bay. And Hawkins found that women's labor is essential in facilitating this aging masculinity on Subic Bay base. So I argue that masculinity is how men access women's labor. So men define their masculinity in terms of the kind of labor that they can access from women and the type of women that they can access that labor from. So I argue women's various form of labor undergird masculinity. So sexual labor, intimate labor, emotional labor, aesthetic labor of looking good, emotional labor of providing emotional intimacy, intimate labor in terms of providing touch, providing care labor, cleaning someone's bottom when they're sick, etc., and reproductive labor. So my methods for this study, I did a global ethnography. I followed this industry for over a decade. I've acted as a participant observer on romance tours. I conducted interviews with both men, women, and employees of the agency. And then I also followed the industry for a while in Ukraine and interviewed numerous different matchmakers. And then, so this is a comparative study kind of across geographical space. So in Colombia, the main guys I talked to that I introduced earlier in the paper were focused on women as drawing them to Colombia as a potential retirement location. One guy said, moving here has revived my romantic life. I can date beautiful women in their 20s without the hang-ups in the US that people in the US have about age differences. There's a never-ending supply of beautiful and feminine women here. Living and working in Colombia, there was a gentleman I met who was in his early 40s and he had moved to Colombia with his local wife. He purchased his wife's family home when her grandfather died in a suburb of Medellin. They ended up actually divorcing once they moved to Colombia, and he was working at a local call center for local wages. And he basically told me there was nothing in the US for him. He had sold his house, his job wasn't really that great, and he's not close with his family. And he said, you know, he hadn't given up on love. He still goes to the agency office in this area of the city. And for $50, he can have them set up a date for him. And so he's met a few other women that way, but nothing serious. In the Philippines, the majority of expats are in serious relationships. Most of them are married and found women through either websites or moving there and meeting them there. And once again, a large number of US veterans. One veteran I met told me that his retirement pension is like 5,000 US dollars a month, and he can live very well with his wife. She already owns the house and she had a hotel business, so they can afford to travel and live a good life. And he says he can get to the VA hospital in Manila with a short flight. He was living on the island of Palawan. Another veteran of, well, the CIA, but still, I guess, technically, I don't know, military or not, but along those lines, he moved to the Philippines actually single. He was never into the bar scene, so bar girls or the sex tourism industry never really appealed to him. He ended up meeting someone pretty quickly. She was much younger than I was expecting at 22. He was about 58. However, he says she's frugal and takes good care of me. And he says, yeah, I never expected to hit it off with someone so young, but my asawa, which is the local word for partner, just takes such good care of me and is such a pleasure to be around. I can help support her to finish school so she can make something of herself. She is really hardworking and persistent in chasing her goals. And he says, well, the 30-year age gap doesn't really make sense in the US, but women here in the Philippines are so mature. They have to deal with helping to raise siblings and financially provide for their family. So she's not interested in partying. She just wants a good man to spend time with and take care of. In Ukraine, I mostly met men who were living there in Kiev and Odessa, and a lot of them were living there during the summers. A lot of younger guys who lived there were digital nomads, looking for easier access to dating women. And a lot of guys I met tried to stay in Ukraine and start their own agencies because they saw the potential to make a lot of money in this industry when they went there as a client. All right, so in terms of starting their own dating agency, I met a guy named Mark Davis. He married a much younger Ukrainian woman. He started his own dating agency, Dream Connections. He created a community to support men online that were interested in dating abroad. So he had a ton of YouTube videos. He kind of considers himself to be a men's coach and have a men's ministry. and he was based largely in the US in Nikolaev. He has since left the industry due to the war. Then I met Alex. He was a Portuguese man who had married a local woman in a smaller city called Poltava in Ukraine. And he began a dating agency called For Him, which he argued provided men with the male perspective, as most of the matchmakers, like boutique matchmakers in Ukraine, are women. He says, I know men who come here and they want to basically stay there. That's why we're full of expats everywhere. They come live because the retirement from there, they can have a nice life here. So they are playboys still. In Ukraine, we have a lot of expats. They can do everything they want. There's no surveillance of their behavior, free to do whatever they want. It's not difficult to be king if everyone's blinded. So some really quick conclusions. The war in Ukraine has largely, I would say, ended this kind of movement of a lot of digital nomads and men to Ukraine, but there are still men who are participating in romance tourism and look at the war in Ukraine as actually a really big opportunity to kind of land a really good looking wife, since women will be desperate to leave because of the war. As I said, Colombia was the geographic space that most men really wanted to actually retire and be in. Most of them described falling in love with the area. The Philippines was dominated by older men, typically veterans, and they tended to be the poorest out of the expat retiree communities that I saw. But overall, this whole romance retirement trend challenges perceptions of Northern financial dominance, as most of these retirees are lacking resources, especially in places like the Philippines. Thank you, and let me know if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Julia. There's been some comments in the chat, so please feel free to look those over. If anyone has any questions for Julia now, Vinci, if you want to unmute yourself and
I see
Yeah,
Vince.
Julia.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your fascinating research. I've always learned so much because I also had this misconception about romance tourism, like kind of thinking that it was the same or equivalent to sex tourism, but apparently it's not. And so I am just wondering if you looked into how romance tourism looks like in the LGBTQ community, or if there are cases where women actually are the ones seeking long-term relationships with foreign men, like while they are traveling. So I know that Dr. Monica shared a little bit about that. So would you like to share a bit with this audience?
Yes, for sure. So
Thank you.
yes, so women, so the romance tour industry that I'm talking about, right, is very much a industry directed by agencies and companies that are very formalized. Whereas women participating in this kind of same romance tourism, it tends not to be through formal agencies. It tends to be more informal and resort type spaces. And so a lot of times scholars have used the romance tourism term to describe women engaging in sex tourism, to differentiate it, because they feel that women are not necessarily being tricked, but being more romanced, and it's not the clear, you give me $50 for an hour of your time, right? Where it's more, there's kind of gift exchanges and buying of things, typically with women, but there's not really this formal agency company kind of apparatus for women. So like if I'm a woman and I want to find a husband in Jamaica, there's not a company to facilitate that for me. I'd have to go do that on my own. In terms of gay tourism, there are some companies that do facilitate things like that. I did see an article about a company that did it in Lebanon, believe it or not, for gay men. So once again, it's more directed at the men. I have not seen formal organizations or companies directing their services towards lesbian women, for example. So I would say most of the formal agencies and things that exist to facilitate this kind of stuff exist for both gay and heterosexual men. If that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Julia, for unpacking that and providing that scope of who and what this industry is targeting, and then for what purposes as well. We did have 2 chats. We only have about a minute. So if you can quickly
Yep,
speak
sure.
to, if you spoke to any women or share about insights to what the women in these relationships and how they feel, as well as just the general feeling of the community having these expat men mostly coming in to date the local women.
I think, you know, the women that I've spoken to, at least in the romance tour industry, most of the women, I think it depends. So women in Colombia were okay with staying in their community and having the guy move there. Some women in the Philippines thought it would be a good idea to retire in the Philippines after living in the US and establishing money and things like that, and then coming back to the Philippines when they retire. Because the life would be easier, and they recognize that it would be, you know, quote unquote cheaper. I think in terms of having so many expats there, I think Colombia currently is oversaturated with over tourism in Medellin, where I did most of my work, and these romance tourists. So there's a lot of guys who call themselves passport bros, which is this new trend on TikTok. It tends to be younger men, men of color, a lot of Black men actually randomly, who are going on to Colombia, to Dominican Republic, but without, once again, this formal vetting from an agency. So they're going and they're using their phones like Tinder, right? Like getting on apps like Tinder. And there has been a couple recent murders actually of American tourists doing that kind of stuff. So there has been some backlash, yes.
Thank you for shedding a light on that. And thank you everyone for your questions. There's more questions in the chat box, Julie, so please feel free to answer those. We're going to move on to our next presenter, and that is Stephanie Clary. So Stephanie Clary is a California local and has degrees in cultural anthropology and social science. She has worked in the education and nonprofit sector since 2008, having worked in China, Egypt, and Djibouti. Steph enjoys travel and brings 10 years of experience as a tour director of international student trips. And she is currently spending the summer in Iceland supporting college students, research expeditions, and is eager to dig deeper into how Iceland is approaching sustainable tourism. And she is a new fellowship student and a volunteer at Rise Travel Institute. And Stephanie's capstone title is called Better Traveled, Reimagining Tourism in Iceland Through Public Campaigns and Community Engagement. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us from Iceland. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. So this is a newer subject for me. I've been a tour director for 10 seasons working with student groups, and it was inspiring to start the coursework for this program and really start learning about sustainability. And I'd been to Iceland several times with students, but it's not a core theme of the subjects, you know, of like what we do with them in terms of programming. And I recently made a trip up to the West Fjords, which is the most remote and under-touristed or least touristed region in Iceland, and realized that so many people go into the most touristed parts of Iceland. They have no idea that there's this incredible, ethereal, quiet wonderland in the far northwest part of the country. It's not a secret, but it's definitely a destination for people who fit the category of a return tourist, who have already come, who've done things like the Golden Circle, the South Coast, the capital, things like that that really get a lot of layover type of tourism. So I became really fascinated when I was in the West Fjords. I've been wanting to go there for years, but I was fascinated with the remoteness. And I started contacting different tourism offices and operators. And so for the purposes of this kind of research exploration, since I am really new to the subject matter, in terms of as a researcher, I started conducting a lit review. There's actually really not that much written about the West Fjords. A lot of things that are tourism related were coming out of rural tourism academia or master's students studying at different universities throughout Iceland. Being able to talk to development offices like Visit West Fjords was very informative. Talking to operators this time of year in high season is nearly impossible to get to have a quality conversation or to get people to participate in a survey. So I did what I could with the time I had, and it's also a subject that I hope to unpack more deeply over the next few months. Okay, the reason why I titled this Better Travel is because Iceland is an incredible destination, but it has a tourism problem in the way that over-tourism has affected it. But economically, the country relies so much on it. And going to the West Fjords really opened my own imagination to it's a place that has a lot of possibility, and they're really just started exploring destination management planning as a concept in 2018, almost 10 years after the country's massive tourism boom. So they're really well positioned. They have a unique opportunity to truly reimagine what they want tourism to look like in their region. And that's a very niche and special place to be that almost no other region in the country has. So next slide. For a little bit of context, tourism really kicked off in Iceland around 2010, and it was this kind of unlikely intersection of crisis between a major volcanic eruption happening. It spewed so much volcanic ash into the air. I think it landed tens of thousands of flights across mainland Europe. That alone just brought a lot of international attention to Iceland and put eyes on the country, and a lot of news coverage aside from just the sheer danger and the drama of the eruption. You know, a lot of people were seeing in the footage how incredibly beautiful the landscape is here. And it's called the Land of Fire and Ice for a reason, because it's geologically very young, and the entire story of Iceland is one of volcanoes and glaciers. And this kind of coalesced at the same time as Iceland was just coming out of a major financial crisis. So the currency, the krona, was super devalued. So there was this combination of like the government rapidly working with a consulting firm to create a campaign that would change people's minds about it not being a dangerous place, in combination with it being both beautiful, safe, and affordable. And so in a period of about 10 years, Iceland went from roughly 500,000 visitors to almost 2.3 million visitors. And this is just a massive influx if you consider that the Icelandic population is now it's about 400,000 people. So the island, like in 2017, was just outnumbered by tourists 7-1. So the economic impact of this cannot be understated, how positive it was for Icelanders, and despite any frustrations they have had with tour operators or even with just bad tourist behaviors, tourism has surpassed both fishing and aluminum as a major source of revenue for the country. So they're really not looking to see tourism decline, but they are looking to see tourism change. And there's some major kind of tension points that came out of this rapid influx of tourism. One of them being obvious strain on pre-existing infrastructure. The country, kind of, especially in the Southwest, where the Keflavik Airport is based, they started with layover tourism, people coming in for 24 to 72 hours, and spending a lot of time in a concentrated period. We also have most tourists coming in the summer, and so it just creates a lot of foot traffic in destinations that are very natural, that have very minimal infrastructure to support them. And by that, I mean even like railways and designated walking paths. So you've got millions of people trampling the same waterfalls. Over time, they're damaging delicate vegetation. There's a species of moss here that takes nearly 100 years to regrow, and that number goes higher the further north in Iceland you go. So they really had to shift their campaigns away from, we want people to come, as many people as possible, over to how do we facilitate safe tourism? because they also started having people die because they were really underestimating the level of danger that is present in a really wild place like Iceland. I'm talking about people dying at beaches, people dying at waterfalls, really just, because there aren't guardrails and enough precautionary infrastructure in place for them. So the people in the West Fjords have been seeing this. Everyone in Iceland is aware of tourism because it's so important and it's such a massive part of life, especially in the seasons of April through September. But COVID decimated the tourism industry globally. And so there was a 2-year recovery period, and it's come back basically to baseline. But the West Fjords is looking to expand and develop its own tourism sector. Next slide, please. And that's why I decided to use them as a case study. They were able to look at the problems that Iceland was having and also some of the solutions, and then think, how can we apply something in a way that makes sense for us? Can we go to the next slide where it says case study West Fjords? Thank you. So you can see the West Fjords is quite, it's in the far northwest corner of Iceland. It has the smallest population. There's roughly 7,000 people who live there out of a population of nearly 400,000 in the country. It's the least visited. I think in 2023, there's not really good numbers for 2024. They received 7% of overnight tourism in the country. So they are feeling like there's really a lot of improvement that they can gain from that. They are still primarily a fishing and fish farming community, which tells you a lot about like kind of the rural nature of people's lives there. It's very harsh environment. It's very cold. It's very windy. But they do have the largest cruise ship port in the country, and they just started destination management planning in 28. That process has been a really exploratory one. Some regions sort of set their destination management planning. They have a lot of data to back it up. The West Fjords is a different area. It's difficult to do surveys. It's difficult to get people to participate in surveys. Most people have pretty, I would say, the Icelandic Tourism Board, for example, did a survey in 2019, and the West Fjords had the least positive response to tourism, which isn't to say that it was bad, but let's say if the rest of the country on average had like 75 to 80% of people surveyed really support more tourism, the numbers in the West Fjords would be lower. People are very concerned about tourists driving on the road. They're very concerned about tourists getting hurt. And they're also really concerned about kind of a place appropriation. They're concerned about the identity of their community changing with the influx of tourists. Some people refer to the West Fjords as sort of like the last vestige of true Icelandic culture. I can't speak for Icelanders as to whether or not they really support that idea, but the West Fjords is just different territory. So there are some tension points that exist in how people there feel about more tourists coming in, and they want to be thoughtful about the way that they're entering the area, because it is very remote, and they want to be thoughtful to not make the same mistakes that other parts of the country made. And I found in conversation with Visit West Fjords, which is kind of this intersection of tour operators and the government level for that region, they had a lot to say about the necessity of organizing very sincerely with municipalities. I mean, let's say there's 10 municipalities in the West Fjords, one of them has a population of 50 people. Which, so it just gives you a sense of the scale of how small some of these places are. And if tourism happens too rapidly and they don't have the infrastructure for it and they don't have the labor demands for it, it could be a literal disaster for them. So they're really, I would say the tourism office is probably more optimistic than people who have been surveyed. That's probably typical because you don't always get the most favorable responses from people who A, don't already work in tourism, B, do not economically benefit directly from tourism, or C, cannot, imagine or envision themselves in the tourist sector. So there's a lot of alienation still being experienced by people in the West Fjord in interfacing with the tourism sector. Can we move to the next slide, please? So this is where Iceland's approach to sustainability comes into place, because there's already been policies. I think Iceland and the Nordic region, broadly speaking, are considered champions of sustainability. Obviously, Iceland has a geothermal and hydro energy sector. A lot of businesses run off of that. They have very high environmental impact standards for operators. But there's still some tension points about what's been happening at major sites. And so they're trying to think about sustainability in this really holistic way, especially as to and pertaining to how it affects the lives of people who have to not just cope with tourism, but also start living in an environment where tourism becomes a core part of their way of life, whether or not they're actually benefiting from it. And some of these include engagement with municipalities. They have to have a very intentional style of planning. Their DMP is a living document that's constantly being revised. They need strong stakeholder partnerships. One of the biggest lessons learned from the southwest part of the country is that there was no clear sense of responsibility. You've got a lot of major sites that are sort of spread across private land, public land, land that's owned by an environmental agency, and there's no clear sense of who was responsible for managing the influx of people and how safely or unsafely they are participating in certain environments. So they really want to get clear on who the stakeholders are, what their responsibilities are. And I think that's also more, that just promotes a communal sense of shared reality. And they want to maintain the character of the region. I mean, the West Fjords is a historical fishing region. The West Fjords was named Eastland in the West Fjords. It has a special charm and quirk to it, and they really want to maintain that. So the Visit West Fjords office is really maintaining this idea that the plan is to avoid mass tourism. They don't want people who are trying to come in for 24 hours, 72 hours. They want people who have already been to Iceland, who are experienced with the weather conditions. They want people who are willing to stay longer and spend more money on quality experiences. So this is a very specific demographic, and they are really looking for like marketing, and they're looking to Nordic countries that already have more robust tourism programs geared towards these types of customers. In particular, Norway is a very good example for them. And there's a couple of ways that they're planning on addressing and marketing tourism into the region. Can we go to the next slide, please? For their destination management goals, I mean, they're really looking at a four-pronged approach. People being surveyed in the West Fjords are not huge fans of cruise ships. I think that's a pretty commonly felt sentiment, but this is mostly because they're largely arriving in the main city, Isafjordur. But this is actually considered a sustainable option because cruises don't bring a lot of people into the interior of the land. So they're feeling like if they can build out more harbors, increase tourism via cruise ships specifically, then they can use the harbor funds from disembarkation fees to develop more cultural programs. So they're really looking to cruise ships as a source of revenue, specifically through the harbors that they come in. Another is to promote cycling and hiking programs there. They really want to work with what they have, and when speaking with their office for managing destination planning, they were very clear they don't want to Disneyfy the West Fjords. They really are like, we live in a beautiful place. There's things to do here year round. It's absolutely stunning, and there's something for everyone. So we want to showcase that, especially around adventure sports, with cycling and hiking. And drive tourism is huge. In the bottom left, there's something called Promoting the West Fjord Way. The West Fjord Way is a route that goes through almost the entire region. It's 575 miles. A significant portion of it is not yet paved, so it's definitely for the adventure, including cycling. And their biggest concern that they've learned from other parts of Iceland is disbursement. If you only have people coming in 3 to 4 months out of the year, that creates a strain not only on local capacity, but it makes it difficult to grow businesses. A lot of operators look to hotel occupancy rates to determine whether or not it's a good place to invest right? So if they don't have high hotel occupancy rates in winter, it doesn't make the West Fjords look like an attractive place to build out investments and therefore infrastructure. So they really want to expand like a robust series of tour programs that they can then market, that they can train tour operators on to then sell as packages to help not only bring in more people, but also kind of disrupt this concentration of people coming in only at one time of year. So we're seeing, I mean, all of Iceland is trying to do that as well. Northern Lights tourism is, pretty popular in the region, but the West Fjords is really hoping, they're really banking on diverse winter programming in particular. But the thing that we're seeing that was really informational for me was how they're thinking about infrastructure. And infrastructure is necessary not only in order to host a bigger influx of people, but it's necessary to create a specific way of experiencing the West Fjords. When you go to a lot of sites, and I've taken so many groups to the most touristed areas, the infrastructure they have is basic. I'm talking like wooden sticks on the ground with a piece of string, and that is delineating a walking path to a waterfall that is visited by, 1.5 million people. It doesn't look very good. And it's also not sufficient because it's not a stable form of infrastructure. It's not lasting, so it's fast and loose and it doesn't adequately redirect people. Can we go to the next slide, please? So something they're looking to build out are something called a tourist magnet. How do you develop infrastructure that creates opportunities for safe viewing that is also stylistic? And this is something they've been really influenced by looking at Norway, and Visit Norway is an incredible resource. On the left, we see a viewing platform that was just finished in 2022 in the West Fjords, and it was considered a great success because there's just not a lot of money in development there yet. So for a municipality to propose a project like a viewing platform, that could easily take 4 or 5 years for that to be, for them to apply for funding, for it to be approved, for it to be designed and then built out. On the right, you see an example from Norway, and they've determined that like designated viewing platforms serve so many functions. Aside from the fact that it just offers these beautiful panoramic views, it also allows you to control where tourists are going in order to get those views, right? Because if they're driving on mostly unpaved road to look at something, they're pulling over in places that are not designated. Sometimes they end up in dangerous situations, on cliff sides that don't have guardrails. So a viewing platform becomes a destination of its own. So it's a really useful and like interesting piece of infrastructure. Can we go to the next slide, please? Something else that was suggested, and this is really a nod to how much the West Fjord planning in particular is really looking to derive influence from Norway and Nordic aesthetics. They don't want to do basic things. They want things to be beautiful, and if they're beautiful, they also become their own attraction. So something that Norway did to encourage people to participate, like getting out of the cities, they also have a major driving route there. They said, let's put attractions that that we need for basic infrastructure along driving routes, like rest stops, but let's make them beautiful. Let's make them artistic and flush with the landscape. Let's do something interesting here. And that's exactly what Norway has done. And the West Fjords is looking at that and they're like, we can do that. We don't want to have ugly concrete roadside rest stops. We want the rest stops to be the points of attraction. It's such a smart way of controlling the parameters of where people are going. Also, kind of a not hilarious consequence of mass tourism in Southwest Iceland was that park rangers and residents were finding human fecal matter everywhere. They didn't have enough toilets, and the national park Thingvellir was a really good example of this. And every park ranger will tell you, that they were just finding poop all over the place because there wasn't enough infrastructure for tourists to be using toilets. So the West Fjords is looking at all of these experiences, and they don't want that to happen where they are. They want slow tourism, which they're defining as people coming in and staying for longer periods of time, being more intentional, dispersing away from the city, using the West Fjord way, having an incredible experience, but being drawn to these magnet points, these really aesthetic toilets. A poo with a view is literally an example that was given to me by the Visits West Fjord office. They want to make it safe. They want to make it beautiful. So infrastructure is actually a very subtle way of doing that. Can we go to the next slide, please? There's a major concern about the preservation of cultural heritage because it was historically a fishing community and still actively is a fishing community. People don't want to lose that kind of flavor, that character. There's a quirky quality to the West Fjords. There's a quirky quality to the people, to the museums that they have. They don't have these kind of world-class facilities like you might find in Reykjavik, that's now much more of a European kind of capital. They are concerned with capturing not only the history, but the living history. How do they preserve these sites to maintain these lifeways, but also make that a point of attraction? So one of the ways that they are looking to reimagine this, if we can go to the next slide, please, is actually through the production of sea salt. There's a brand called Saltwerk that is one of the top selling items to tourists who come to Iceland. And the story behind it is incredible. And again, a nod to these Nordic influences. Some people are familiar with the restaurant Noma. I think that's in Copenhagen. The new Nordic cuisine movement really sparked this idea that food should be hyper local, it should be beautiful, it should be ethical, and it should be presented in a specific way, really relying on the character and flavor of the region. And Iceland has a culinary scene, but I wouldn't say that it has a distinct culinary identity. So a chef who was working in Copenhagen came back to the West Fjords and said, there's such a history here of fishing and fish preservation using the salt from these pristine waters. Why don't we create a top-end culinary product from that? And the quality of the product, the branding of the product, it really speaks to kind of the direction and branding that the West Fjords is looking to aspire to, not just as like a family-friendly environment, not just as a destination for adventure sports or for drive tourism, but also as a place that can offer something that's a bit sophisticated. And you're not seeing that at a lot of the major destinations or in the Southwest region outside of the capital. Like these are really kind of new ideas because now people are able to slow down and say, oh, we have millions of people coming in. We lost millions of people during COVID, and that's come back. Let's have a reassessment period. But so many things have already been built up to accommodate mass influx. The West Fjords is trying to be really, really specific, not only with how they're doing it and how many people they are bringing in, but also the aesthetic and the branding of what the West Fjords is like in comparison to other parts of the country. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I think there's these tensions that I've been finding in translated surveys of residents in the West Fjord, but also like their vision versus kind of what the tourism offices want to do on a regional level. There is some tension there. So it does seem very important for them to really work closely with the municipalities. But at the end of the day, they've been spending years, I mean, literal years developing this. Even the conversations they're having last year are for 2027. They're really trying to be intentional with their rollout of this, but everything comes down to marketing. How do they market the West Fjords as a place that people should want to come to who have experience? How do they market the West Fjords in a way that will attract investment so that they can have this like these magnet type of infrastructure and also have more winter focused tourism that disperses mass crowding of tourists. So all of these things are really top of mind. And in reviewing literature and academic research and what graduate students are focusing on, there's a real concern about cultural resource management, not only like old culture, Norwegian fishing ship, archaeological sites type of culture, but the living, breathing culture. How do they maintain that? So all of these things are very top of mind for people in the region right now, and the conversations that are being had in their tourism sector specifically. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the things that kind of emerged to me in my initial survey of this region and what's been written about it and what is being surveyed, intentionality is driving this. They have a clear advantage because they haven't been over touristed yet. They have a clear advantage to set the pace of tourism and a clear advantage to brand themselves in a very specific way. Extended seasonality is what everyone surveyed really wants. They don't want a cluster. They want everyone coming in summer. They want to see more winter destination because that also affects employment. You've got people owning local businesses and they have to shut them down for half the year because they don't have a justifiable volume of people coming in. They want safety. They don't want incidents of tourists coming into the West Fjords and dying because they froze to death or dying because they tried to take a selfie over, a gorgeous fjord and then they fell because there were no guardrails and there were no designated viewing platforms. They want low environmental impact. They're looking for sports, viewing, any way that they can engage people in enjoying the natural environment without causing harm is very important. And so the infrastructure piece is very top of mind in that regard as well. And they want accountability. They don't want to see instances where no one is able to say, oh, well, we are the ones who should be providing XYZ, or this happened because of a failing and our part to follow through with some sort of policy. They want very, very strong stakeholder engagement. So I think they've learned a lot of lessons from mistakes that happened with this mass influx into tourism in the southwest part of the country. And they're very clear that they don't want to be the next case of that. So there's a lot to explore there. I think I've probably gone over my time, so I apologize for that. Thank you so much for being patient. I'd love to field any questions that anyone has about tourism in Iceland, my experience as a tour director and student programs here, kind of what I've been learning about the West Fjords. I was just up there a couple of weeks ago. I highly recommend if you are a hardcore hiker that you go to the National Preserve. It's really incredible.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We are at time, so if you do have any questions, please drop them in the chat box. And Stephanie, you can go ahead and answer them in the chat box. We are going to move on to our next presentation, but that was so interesting. I've never been to Iceland. I don't know who here has, but that is definitely on my radar now. And although I'm not a hiker, I'm really excited to share this with other hikers in my circle and in my network.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to our last presentation, and this is a co-project presented by two individuals. The first individual is Aline Moura. Dr. Aline Moura is a writer, researcher, and content strategist specializing in the intersections of emotion, knowledge, and power. She is currently in the content and research lead at Rise Travel Institute, where she oversees multi-platform narratives that promote ethical and inclusive travel. With over a decade of experience in cultural narratives, her work combines rigorous research with editorial strategy to challenge dominant perspectives and deepen engagement with contemporary global issues. And Aline will be presenting alongside Jillian Spratt. Jillian Spratt is a sustainability and impact professional with a passion for building integrated impact strategies and transparent public-facing disclosures for values-driven organizations. With a strong foundation in the circular economy, stakeholder engagement, and impact storytelling, she helps companies align their business goals with meaningful, measurable sustainability outcomes. Jillian believes that true progress happens at the intersection of sustainability and equity and brings this perspective to every project she undertakes. In 2024, she was a collaborating author to Pathways to Equity, Rise Travel Institute's Decolonial Guide to Travel for the Conscious Traveler, an ebook focused on equity-centered, responsible travel practices, and she holds a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science and a Master's of Arts in Business Communication from Rider University. And today's capstone project by Dr. Aline and Jillian is called Pathways to Equity, Educating for Ethical and Decolonial Travel. So welcome, Jillian and Dr. Aline.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we can see it, Aline.
And everyone for joining us today. My name is Aline Moura. I'm the research and content lead at Rise Travel Institute, and I was a participant of the Spring 2022 cohort. And in my capstone project, I examined how the program shaped my travel to Portugal at the time. That experience was transformative. It allowed me to see in real time how the program could reshape the way I moved through the world as a traveler. And
I'm Jillian Spratt. I'm also an alumna of RISE's August 2023 cohort. And I joined RISE on the experiential journey to the Yucatan in Mexico in 2024. I'm also the impact manager at Storyroot, a strategic impact studio whose mission is to eradicate greenwashing from the world of environmental and social impact. So it's through that specific lens that I approached not only the collaboration of the ebook that we'll share, but also my RISE capstone project, which looked at sustainable tourism certification schemes and assessing their strengths and weaknesses as a tool for travelers within the industry.
in the beginning of the project, we are going to talk about the guide, the Pathways to Equity, and it all started in 2023. We created a working group to explore the idea of a toolkit for travelers, a short toolkit. It was supposed to be a short, practical resource to reflect on the ethics of travel. But early in the process, we encountered a critical decision. Should we use the word decolonize? Would it alienate people or invite them to think more deeply? So we debated it openly in this working group, and some of us worried it might scare people off, but in the end, we chose clarity over comfort. We decided the decolonization needed to be said. We used the word decolonization to recognize the effect of colonialism on the world, because what we were talking about wasn't just sustainable travel. It was about confronting long-standing systems of coloniality, extraction, and inequity in global tourism, and how these systems continue to be perpetrated by tourism. And then we developed the content that you will see today.
So we'll be walking through what the guide actually does. And before we get into it, part of what we recognized is that while we believe this to be a very thoughtful and comprehensive guide, it also inherently can't be absolute or definitive. We each, pick up this resource with different identities, backgrounds, experience, and certainly starting points in our decolonial journeys. And so in acknowledging that, we began part one with this idea of unpacking nuanced concepts. So let's hop to the next one. Thank you. So these are some of the foundational concepts and definitions that many travelers may not have fully explored, starting with colonization, which is the actual settling or establishing control over a territory, right? It's an act. Colonialism is the practice or sort of broader system that enables the exploitation of a people or place. And then coloniality, which is the continuation of colonialism in the present day. And this really refers to the long-standing patterns of power and domination that exist within and continue to shape social structures, economic structures, knowledge systems, cultural norms, government and global power. And so colonization as an act may be more overt, while coloniality appears in more sort of subtle but very persistent ways. And we also situate these terms within broader systems of oppression. So colonialism usually intersects with other big systems and concepts like white supremacy, capitalism, the climate crisis, and all of these systems reinforce one another and therefore make it incredibly difficult to dismantle systemic barriers. Thank you, Aline. So in part two of the ebook, we then start connecting these concepts to the tourism industry specifically, how tourism can reflect and often deepen colonial dynamics between a traveler and a place. To name a few examples, we discuss how travelers may unknowingly impose their own worldview, either directly through, physical and verbal behavior, which over time influences the cultural fabric of a place to one that caters to, Western preferences and ultimately leads to cultural erosion and gentrification. Or we can impose these views indirectly by just internalizing certain judgments, which leads to biased storytelling about a people or place. We talk about how, as travelers, we can commodify culture by supporting the commercialization of cultural traditions or artifacts. And we explore power imbalances through concepts like economic dependency on tourism and tourism leakage, where only $5 of every $100 spent by a traveler stays within the local economy, and a disproportionate amount of money goes to, Western-owned hotels and tours. And then if we hop to the next slide, we then highlight those concepts through 5 very different case studies. We won't go into detail today, but just to kind of give you a sense of the varied slate of examples, we looked at Jamaica's struggle with beach privatization. We looked at the colonial roots and legacy of safari tourism and conservation movements more broadly. We talked about yoga earlier in a earlier presentation. So this idea of foreign-owned yoga and wellness retreats and how that can erase cultural origins. And then digital nomadism as, when it's left unchecked as sort of an example of modern colonialism. In part 3, we start getting into decolonial theory, which questions Eurocentric perspectives and advocates for not only the validation, but the revitalization of Indigenous knowledge systems. So part 3 is all about how we start to interact with the theory conceptually. And we discuss concepts like pluriversality, embracing multiple ways of knowing and being, systems thinking using this iceberg model that encourages us to recognize the underlying patterns and areas of interconnection in order to expose root cause. And then reparation movements, different avenues to address historical injustices and support a just transition. So what Aline will talk about next in part 4 is really how to begin putting decolonial theory into practice.
Yeah, so the 4th part is the most actionable section, but we want to clarify something important. At RISE, we do not believe in offering travelers a checklist of do's and don'ts. So instead, we emphasize the why behind decisions. Rather than describing behaviors, we aim to inspire travelers to think more deeply, ask better questions, and engage with local contexts and power dynamics more critically. So we want travelers to come away not with a rulebook, but with a new lens, one that helps them ask, what am I participating in? Who is impacted? How can I move differently? So we structured part 4 around the travel timeline, before the trip, during the trip, and after the trip. And we won't spoil the whole section, but here is a small preview. This part is presented through short dialogues that guide travelers to think systematically and compassionately, not judgmentally. And then we have this part reflecting on feelings of entitlement, and then we are in a dialogue. The traveler says the opinion, and then the RISE Travel Institute, the guide, help the traveler reflect on this feeling. And then in the part 5, we have case studies, because we want to close with hope, story of indigenous and community-led tourism and ideas for more equitable models. One of the case studies we include is Decolonized Safari, that where we showed the shift narratives about safari travel by centering local voices and challenging colonial tropes. And these are not perfect models, of course, but they show that change is happening. And we also shared in the part 5, the final section, the voices of practitioners and experts who are actively rethinking what ethical travel looks like. As Justine Abigail, founder of Live-In-, told us, at the heart of decolonizing travel is understanding how power functions and working to dismantle the oppressive systems that much of our world has been built upon. It begins first and foremost with an honest assessment of where we ourselves as individuals lie in the spectrum of power. These reflections invite us to engage with travel not from a place of guilt, but from a place of responsibility, humility, and connection. And that's the kind of engagement we hope the ebook, the guide, helps to inspire.
I love that, Aline, not from a place of guilt, but from a place of responsibility and humility. So since launching this ebook, we've seen over 2,000 downloads. Rise conducted a reading and discussion workshop with members of Wonderful. I'm sure many of you are aware that Wonderful is a partner of Rise. It's been used in classrooms across the US and adopted by professionals to reshape their own curriculums. Specifically, 2 university professors involved in the study abroad office and one leading a student trip to Hong Kong used the Pathways to Equity ebook as required reading for their students. Vinci was invited into their classrooms to facilitate discussion before their trip, and after their trip was invited back to guide a reflective debrief using a decolonial lens. Currently, we're working on translating part 5 of the ebook as its own standalone guide in different languages, which is incredibly exciting. And moving forward, we are committed to doing an annual audit to not only include up-to-date information, but as the world around us changes and we continue to learn ourselves, we will be updating this ebook to reflect those insights, and we'll be adding a section to the guide to endorse companies and organizations that demonstrate commitment to decolonial principles. So all that to say, really excited about the evolution, and hope you all stay tuned for those updates.
Thank you so much, Jillian and Aline. Yes, I will also be downloading the guide, so please take out your phones now if you haven't already. Scan this QR code so you can download it straight to your phone or go online at ricetravelinstitute.org and you'll find it there. I'm going to pass it over, or actually, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself now and ask those questions. I know we are short on time, and then I do want to pass it over to Vinci for closing announcements. And then Karen, that question about accessing the book, you can use this QR code or go online at Rise Travel. All right, if there aren't any other questions, again, you can feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Jillian and Aline, you can manage this chat from there. I'm going to pass it over to Vinci. Thank you, everyone, for all your wonderful presentations, for your attention, for your patience with our technical snafus, and also just for supporting the wonderful work that all our presenters and professionals and people that are really interested in bringing justice into the tourism industry, and all the time that they spent to create these capstone projects for you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Oops, can you all hear me tonight? Let's just remove this. Can you all hear me? Okay, perfect. So yeah, wow, what an incredibly inspiring day. I just wanted to extend my warmest congratulations to all of our presenters for their outstanding work. Each presentation was not only well-researched and compelling, but also deeply personal, which I deeply appreciate. And I can also truly feel your passion and your commitment to building a more responsible, more ethical, and more decolonized travel and tourism industry. And I think we need to take a moment to celebrate the diversity of this audience and also our group of presenters, knowing that many of you are calling in from different parts of the world. Our presenters calling in from India, Thailand, Italy, Ecuador, Guatemala, Iceland, and the US, and talking about more countries such as Ukraine, Colombia, and the Philippines, about how tourism in these countries can do better. And so to give a little bit of context to our audience, these powerful projects that you've just heard today are not master's degree theses. They are, though they easily could be, they're just the result of a 10-week intensive learning journey in our flagship program. And the level of thoughtfulness, the depth of inquiry, and the amount of research and reflection poured into each presentation is just truly remarkable. So I think this is a true testament to what is possible when we come together in a space that prioritizes critical thinking, systems thinking, introspection, and collective growth. And a huge shout out to Dr. Anu Taranath, who has guided this cohort so beautifully and opened our annual conference so beautifully through big questions, starting with self-awareness, empathy, and moving all the way to grappling with the larger issues that we're facing nowadays, as the planet burns, as authoritarianism rises, as human rights are trampled, and the climate crisis intensifies. How are we showing up in the world? And so I will leave you with that question. And with that, before I close, I also promised to share some exciting news about the things that we have been working on here at RISE. The first exciting update, let me share my screen. Okay, so the first exciting update is, Jillian just talked about translations of a part of our ebook. So this is the first translation. We translated part 4 into traditional Chinese. And this is a significant step towards decolonizing our educational resources and acknowledging that that English language dominance or supremacy limits access to education, not only in higher education, but also in grassroots movements. So translating this guide into Chinese is just the beginning. And we have a team of volunteers, if you remember in my progress or impact report at the beginning, we have a team of volunteers who collectively speak over 30 languages on the team. So Spanish is the next one, and more languages will follow soon. So this is the first news. The second gift that I would love to share with you today would be, oh, sorry, I was gonna scroll through a few parts, just, giving you an idea of how much work that and labor of love, how much work that we poured into this project. So if you have friends who speak the language, feel free to share this with them. And then the second one is our brand new guide to ethical volunteering with asylum seekers, a trauma-informed approach. So this resource is especially close to my heart, as some of my most formative overseas travel experiences have involved working with the refugee population. So so I deeply believe that all volunteers should receive proper training, to ensure that the engagement with refugees and asylum seekers is both respectful and ethical. And our partner organization, Kira Martinez, I believe that she's here. Our Love Without Borders for Refugees in Need affirmed the urgent need for this kind of guide and generously shared her insights throughout its development as well. So let me just scroll through real quickly, to show you what it is about. So there's a part on the global refugee situation and forced migration situation, and the needs of refugees awaiting asylum, and what is the trauma-informed principles, what is the cultural humility definition, and how do we work with refugees using these frameworks. So here we have how tips on how to interact with refugees respectfully and so on. And then the last part is a reflective journal, helping volunteers really reflect and think more deeply about their interactions and their mindset, basically, regarding their involvement, regarding their service mission. So yeah, I hope that you will download this guide, even whether or not you're going to volunteer with refugees, because in all sorts of community development with minoritized or marginalized communities, this guide or the framework can be really handy. So this is the new guide that we are going to publish on the 1st of July. And we're also excited to share that we're currently building a community platform. I don't have it on the screen, but the platform is a digital space where we continue these critical conversations around tourism impacts and travel ethics outside of our events. So we're going to use the platform to feature regularly released free resources, which means these resources are going to be hosted on that platform. A book club starting this August that Dr. Julia and Celestina, another colleague of ours, are going to host every even-numbered month, and opportunities to connect with like-minded individuals who are passionate about sustainability and justice in travel in general. So whether you're looking for collaboration, inspiration, or thoughtful dialogue, this is going to be the space for you. So both of these resources that I just mentioned will go live on the 1st of July. Make sure that you get on our mailing list so that you're not going to miss the opportunity. All right, so coming up at Rise Travel Institute, so coming up at Rise, we have a few more things in the pipeline. A short course on conscious travel in Bhutan, a 1-hour free place-based course on all that you want to know about Bhutan before traveling there, and we'll be releasing it in August. We're just it's already there, and I'm so excited about the content. I can't wait for you to check it out. And then a carbon literacy and climate justice training for tourism professionals set to launch this fall. And Crest and Tourism Cares will be as our supporting partners. And we are going to launch a new season, our season 6 of our podcast. And this season, we're going to hear from travel experts and travelers about the implications of U.S. foreign and immigration policies on domestic and cross-border travels and migration. And then on September 29th, we're going to start our 9th cohort of our flagship program. Registration is now already open. I strongly encourage you to join this award-winning program if you haven't yet, if you love what you've learned today. I created a coupon code annualconference25 for a 10% off your registration fee for the coming cohort. So yeah, I'm gonna type it in the chat just in case you need it. So annual conference 25 would be the code to get a 10% off the tuition fee for the flagship program. And last but not least, let me tell you about something truly special. That is our experiential journey to India, happening from the 17th to the 28th of November this year. And we have our amazing Jody, who has been really the person, leading all the preparations behind the trip. And I can confidently say to you that you won't find anything quite like this anywhere else. And here's why. Well, first of all, you experience deep, meaningful connections with the local communities and the natural world. And you'll be directly supporting rural initiatives, especially those led by women. And you will be traveling alongside a group of like-minded, thoughtful, compassionate travelers, all grounded in RISE's reflective or educational frameworks to help you unpack the experience together. And the cherry on the top will be, you will be joined by Dr. Anu Taranath, who will bring so much wisdom, insight, and heart into our journey, guiding all the conversations around justice, privilege, identity, and more. So there will be an info session next Tuesday, 1st of July at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, where we'll give more information about the trip, the itinerary, our objectives, eligibility, costs, and everything. If you want to learn more, please register for the Zoom call, the info session. Jody just shared a link in the chat. And before we wrap up, I'd love to introduce someone very special, our new board president, Casey Hanisco, who is here to share a few words with us. Casey brings a wealth of experience and heart to our organization. Not only is she RISE's board chair now, she's also an executive coach and leadership consultant supporting women and purpose-driven leaders. And many of you may also know her from her years of leadership in the tourism industry, including over a decade of service as president at the Adventure Travel Trade Association. We're incredibly lucky to have her wisdom and vision guiding us forward. And over to you, Casey.
Thanks, Vincy. This was so amazing. I'm so glad I was able to come for the whole conference. I didn't think I was going to be able to. So really, really wonderful presentations and learning by everyone. And it's just such a wonderful reflection of all of the work that RISE is doing around this topic. And so it just makes all of the work that we're supporting at RISE feel so special. And I think Vincy mentioned, but we have several other new board members that just joined us. And I'm so pleased that we'll all be working alongside Vincy and the amazing team of volunteers. Like, they're incredible. I can't even put to words how amazing Vincy has organized all of these wonderful volunteers. It's a testament to how wonderful she is. But the board is here to support RISE being a sustainable business and, well, organization, a nonprofit. And that is something that all of you can help support us just by thinking about partnerships that might be relevant for RISE so that we can get these educational materials more in front of more travelers or trade professionals or travelers who might become trade professionals, whatever difference we can make. So it's so meaningful work. And I certainly was inspired by Anu this morning and wish that I could go on the experiential journey myself this fall, because was just imagining what a special experience that would be to be with her in India. So I hope that some of you on this call or listening to this call are also inspired. And I think with that, I just want to say too, like, I've gone through the flagship program. It's special. Many of you know because you have just presented on it, but it really is deep. It's thoughtful. It really touches so many different aspects of the tourism industry. So I really hope that alongside Vincy and the team of volunteers, that the board can help create even more accessible courses and educational materials so that we can get out in front of even more people. So with that, just thank you. Thank you for being with us all here today. Thank you, Vincy, for everything you do to lead this organization. So back to you.
Thank you so much, Casey. I really appreciate everything that you said. And I am excited to continue working closely with you going forward, Casey. So I hope everyone today found the presentations as moving, as motivating, as inspiring as I did. Thank you so much for spending a whole day, like a whole Saturday with us, for listening, for learning, unlearning, and continuing to walk this path towards a more ethical, decolonial, and responsible future of tourism. So have a good rest of your day, and the recording will be shared with you tomorrow at the latest. You will be receiving an email from us. So, and also big thanks to Jody and Natalie for moderating today's event. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And please stay in touch. For those who are not yet in the RISE community, you are now. So reach out to us anytime you want. And yeah, hope to see you all at the next event. Thank you. Bye-bye.